Awaken my pack, the Plant Beast! Charge!
The prison facility on Carthos Station was designed for one purpose: control, orbiting a cold blue gas giant at the edge of civilized space. The station held the galaxy's most dangerous prisoners. Pirates, smugglers, war criminals, and political rebels all passed through its reinforced corridors. The station's owners, the Varn Dominion, believed in harsh discipline. To them, fear was the most effective tool in the universe, and no one demonstrated that philosophy better than Warden Krell. Krell was a towering Varn officer with dark metallic skin and eyes like burning embers. His species believed in dominance above all else. Weakness was punished, and mercy was considered a flaw. Which is why he found today's prisoners so interesting. The human sat chained to a metal restraint chair in the middle of the interrogation chamber. His name was Jonas Hale, former Terran scout, current prisoner, and the only reason he was still alive was because of the creatures locked inside the containment cages behind him. 6 small alien cubs watched silently through glowing energy bars. They belonged to a species called the Zerathi. Across the galaxy, the Zerathi were feared as apex predators. Fully grown adults stood nearly 3 meters tall, with thick-plated armor, glowing green eyes, and claws capable of slicing through starship hull plating. But the creatures behind the cage bars were still young, barely half-grown. Their armor plates were soft, their limbs slightly too long for their bodies, and their curious eyes constantly followed the humans sitting nearby. Jonas had been captured 3 months earlier. The Dominion had taken the cubs during a raid on a Zerathi nesting world. Now they planned to sell them to wealthy collectors. But the cubs had refused to eat. They had refused to respond to trainers. They had refused everything, except Jonas. No one knew why. But when the human was placed in the containment wing for interrogation, the cubs immediately gathered around their cage wall closest to him. They chirped softly when he spoke. They calmed when he sat nearby. To the Dominion, that made him useful. To Warden Krell, it made him a tool. The alien warden stepped forward slowly. "You will speak," Krell said coldly. Jonas remained silent. The first strike came from an electro whip. The crack echoed through the chamber as electricity tore across Jonas's back. He clenched his teeth. Behind him, the cubs erupted into panicked cries. Krell glanced at them. Interesting. He struck again. Another crack, more sparks. The cubs slammed against the energy barrier, their claws scraping uselessly against the glowing wall. "Tell me," Krell continued calmly, "how to control them." Jonas laughed weakly. "You're doing a great job already." The whip struck again. Pain flared through his muscles, but Jonas didn't scream. He looked over his shoulder at the cubs instead. Their glowing green eyes stared back at him. Fear, anger, confusion. Jonas exhaled slowly. "Hey," he whispered. The cubs quieted slightly. Krell noticed. "Fascinating," the warden muttered. He raised the whip again. "This will continue until you cooperate." Jonas shook his head. "You don't understand them. I understand pain." The whip cracked again. The cubs shrieked. One of them slammed its body against the barrier so hard the entire cage vibrated. Jonas's voice dropped to a whisper. "So that's your plan," he said softly. "Break me in front of them." Krell tilted his head. "Yes." Jonas nodded slowly. "Big mistake." The warden raised the whip again. That was when Jonas leaned slightly toward the cubs and whispered something. The guards didn't hear it. The cameras didn't pick it up. But the cubs did. 6 heads snapped toward him instantly. Their glowing eyes changed. Something ancient and instinctive awakened inside them. Because the word Jonas had spoken wasn't human. It was Zerathi. a word he had learned months earlier while quietly listening to their strange chirping language. A single command. Together, the cubs froze. Then they began to move. At first it looked like panic. They ran in circles inside the cage, climbing over each other, slamming into the energy barrier. The guards laughed. "Stupid beasts," one muttered. Krell watched more carefully. Something about their movement felt deliberate. The cubs suddenly lunged toward the same section of the barrier at once. 6 bodies collided with the energy field simultaneously. The barrier flickered. Energy systems overloaded briefly. Jonas smiled through the pain. "Again," he whispered. The cubs repeated the motion, harder. The barrier sparked violently. Alarm lights flashed across the chamber. Krell stepped forward in sudden anger.
"Stop them!"
Too late. The third impact shattered the containment field. 6 young Zerathi exploded out of the cage. The guards raised their weapons. They didn't fire in time. The cubs moved like lightning. Claws slashed across armor joints. One guard dropped instantly. Another screamed as sharp teeth sank into his arm. Jonas broke his restraints during the chaos. Years of Terran survival training kicked in. He grabbed a fallen stun baton and swung it into another guard's helmet. Krell backed toward the exit. "You think this saves you, human?" he snarled. Jonas wiped blood from his mouth. "No." Behind him, the cubs formed a loose semicircle, protecting him. "But it saves them." Station alarms blared throughout Carthos. Security teams rushed toward the containment wing, but they arrived too late to stop what happened next. The cubs weren't just fighting randomly, they were coordinating, flanking, distracting, moving like a pack, exactly the way adult Zerathi hunted. Jonas realized something surprising. "They're not following me," he muttered. The smallest cub stepped forward proudly. Its glowing eyes flicked toward him, then toward the corridor. It chirped a quick command. The others responded instantly. Jonas laughed. "Well, guess I'm following you." Minutes later, the group reached the emergency hangar. A small cargo shuttle waited inside. Jonas opened the hatch quickly. "All right, kids," he said. "Field trip." The cubs scrambled aboard. The shuttle blasted away from Carthos Station just as security forces flooded the hangar. Hours later, far from Dominion space, the shuttle drifted quietly near a distant asteroid belt. Jonas sat in the cockpit, exhausted. The cubs curled up around him on the floor. The smallest one nudged his hand gently. Jonas smiled. "You guys did pretty good back there." The cub chirped proudly. Weeks later, Zerathi scouts would discover the shuttle, and when the adult warriors learned how the human had protected their young, they made a decision. Across the stars, the Zerathi would become known for many things. Their power, their ferocity, their unstoppable hunting packs. But from that day forward, they would also remember one human, the one who refused to break, and the quiet whisper that changed everything.